Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassett, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. It's a big day here at PAC 14. They're all big, but we've got one of our favorite people in the house today, Salisbury Police Chief Barbara Duncan. Welcome, Chief.
Thank you for having me.
So, a lot going on in your world lately.
Yes.
I've never known a more serious time in law enforcement than the one we're going through right now. So, tell me what your professional life is like right now with all this.
It's extremely busy. You know, we're working on some really serious events internally within the Salisbury Police Department. We're also working through a global pandemic, and now, it's all hands on deck, working through the killing of Mr. George Floyd. So we definitely have our plates full in Salisbury Police Department.
I know this is the George Floyd incident is certainly one of those things that have gotten all of our attention, but you've sort of been living this kind of thing for a long time in terms of the stress between people and police.
Sure, absolutely. We're the most visible representative of government out there, so we tend to catch a lot of the tension regardless. But really it started, that tension started to ramp up several years ago down in Ferguson, Missouri, with the events that unfolded down there. So yes, our officers have been working through this for quite some time now.
So what's it like for your officers? Do they get it? I mean, is there a mindset that goes on when you're a police officer? Do they understand what people might be thinking in terms of how they sort of judge their performance in the public?
Oh, absolutely, and that's never been more clear than it has been after this past May 25th exactly. A lot of the officers are reporting, just being out in the public, and they're now subject to kind of that broad brush commentary. And when they go in and pick up their food during their meal periods, if they happen to be on a call for service, working through issues in the community, sure, there's a lot of really pointed, and some of it's very negative and disturbing commentary coming from the public that we're serving.
Is it legitimate from the public, or do they just not understand?
I think the frustration and the fear and the concern and the humanity from the public is absolutely legitimate. And it's shared by the men and women who wear a uniform in this region. It's absolutely devastating, So you cannot escape any of that. So whether you wear a uniform in service or not, it's a legitimate concern.
I can't imagine what it's like to be out there. I mean, most of us, the experience that we have as the fat white guy, it's from watching Law and Order and Cops, and I get a sense that that's how it is in the world, but it's not really that way in the real world.
The Law and Order scenarios?
Yeah.
No, they're packaged very nicely. No one ever does any paperwork. It all seems to get done in about 30 minutes or 60 minutes, depending on the show that you're watching. And that's awesome, but that certainly has nothing to do with what actually happens.
Yeah, and certainly now they've taken Cops off the air because that was probably not an actual depiction of how life is for a police officer.
I'm not real sure.
Yeah.
I've watched the series a handful of times early on, and it was certainly an interesting production, to say the least. But I could tell you that the real world experience of a police officer involves a lot of connectivity, a lot of presence. You're working through really difficult cases, and then you're handling, the more average run-of-the-mill cases, and that can happen multiple times a day, especially if you're a Salisbury police officer.
One of the things I've always wondered about, and this has actually gotten some discussion now in terms of the idea that perhaps people who are social workers could be deployed to scenes. So one of the things in the ride-alongs I've done as a reporter, so many of the cases that I got to see, which were really none of my business, I should never have seen them, where they were domestic calls, where people involve father-sons, husbands, wives, really serious social situations within a home, and a police officer has been called in there to kind of take care of it. Mm-hmm. And it always seemed like that wasn't really the best way to have a police officer with guns and stuff in there trying to be mediators in a social situation. So there's talk of maybe having other ways for for not law enforcement so much, but for people sort of in charge or government to help mediate these situations that are social in the community. Any thoughts about that kind of stuff?
Well, I'm a huge proponent of mediation, first and foremost. Secondly, though, when you're talking, if we just talk specifically about calls for service related to domestic violence, those are one of the most dangerous calls for service that a police officer can respond to because they're highly charged. Every room that you enter in a domestic violence call for service has potential, it's potentially very easily accessible for weapons that can be used either against, the other party in the call or against the police officers or against the individual themselves. So I'm not certain that that would be the best use of non-police resources, at least during that really volatile moment when the call for service first comes in. There are other calls for service. Police officers are dispatched on a host of mental health related calls for service, and right now in our state, police officer is dispatched for an emergency petition, and we transport them in our patrol vehicle, which necessitates having handcuffs placed on individuals who are in the midst of a mental health crisis. And we need to change that immediately. So a couple of things there. One, mental health should never be considered equal to a crime. A mental health crisis does not equate a criminal act. And what that does for a police officer, even when you're working with a juvenile, having to place handcuffs on individuals where your handcuffs don't even fit because the individual's arm is so small, it does nothing for police community relations with respect to that individual and that police officer in that very critical moment of that individual's life. In fact, it's a very negative outcome in the long term because even though that individual is struggling with a crisis at the moment, the overwhelming and very loud message is that this is a criminal event. And that should not be happening. In my former jurisdiction, we would actually ride out with crisis professionals. So we were there for the safety factor. A lot of these calls can go sideways very quickly, but that crisis-trained individual was much better suited in working with that individual that was in crisis. And if they needed to go to the hospital, which of course, when you have an emergency petition, that's where you're transporting that individual to, they're transported in an ambulance, which is a game changer. So hoping that now, we'll be able to get some legislative changes in place where we can kind of shift that dynamic and work in partnership to make sure that people get what they need when they need it and that our relationships remain intact with the public that we're serving.
It must be weird to be in a situation where there's so many entities that want to tell you how to do your job based on everything that's going on, when you know how your job needs to be done. So what's it like to have politicians and community leaders trying to tell you how your job should be done?
Well, first of all, I think anyone in this industry who kind of fails to understand that if you look back at our history, which dates back to Peel and London, we're supposed to be of and by the community. So, we get our authority from the people that we're serving and protecting. There are things that we can improve on. There are things that we need to improve on. But there's also an educational piece that we would be remiss if we failed to provide when those questions, when those concerns come up. And so I know that everybody wants change immediately. We are an impatient lot, and we are instantly gratified by so much in our society today. But substantial change takes time, and we need to listen. We also need to provide information, and we really need to, in partnership, just shift this ship a couple of degrees.
Right. It also seems to me like where communities have a lot of trouble, maybe our community has been spared from some of the trouble that you see elsewhere. Do you get a sense of that, or are we just like everyone else?
I think that we have been walking a really fortunate path. I think that we've done a fair job of meeting the needs where they are. I think that getting information out early has been important. I think that the way that we engage with individuals who are exercising their First Amendment rights in a peaceful manner has been very, very well received and hugely important, not only for the group, but for us as well.
Yeah, I've noticed in some of these events where people have gathered to sort of protest, or not protest so much, but to make their viewpoints known, to show some unity. You're always there, your officers are there, and when you're there, I don't get the sense that you're there to police what's going on, that you're almost there to participate, to be a citizen with these people and to interact.
Well, our policy when it comes to protests and demonstrations is very specific. We do not take sides. And we do that for very legitimate reasons. We don't want to, as a government entity, bolster any one side over another. What we are there to do is to make sure that safety is in place, that individuals who are protesting receive the benefit of their amendments and are protected. But in this case, as it relates to these protests here, which have been occurring since after May 25th of this year, this is about police and policing and what we want as a nation moving forward. So in this respect, and what the discussions that we've had internally have been about, have included pieces about you're fine if you want to participate. That is strictly your choice. This is about where we're moving as a nation, about policing. And with respect to with our policy and protocol, that is suspended for now. And you can engage, and you feel that you want to participate, by all means. You know, you're not gonna get in trouble if you get interviewed. You're not going to get in trouble if you walk or participate in a protest in any way, shape, or form. And I think it's really important because the community needs to understand that we're human too, and that our voices count, and none of us represent or even closely resemble that individual officer who killed George Floyd. So having the public see that and understand that is huge. It's critically important.
It seems like we were early with the body cameras thing in terms of officers in Salisbury having the body cameras. Has that been a good thing or a bad thing?
That's been a very good thing. I think we were right behind Fruitland. Fruitland Police Department got out in front of us with that, and we watched, you know, what was happening with them, and then we stepped up right in behind them. It's been invaluable for us. Not only does it help us identify training needs and improve standards, but it also provides a level of confidence to our public as well. You know, the more, I guess, the more that you're on camera just in the community in general, it really makes sense to have your officers be able to access and use body-worn cameras.
I know where I am downtown, the two officers that I've interacted the most with, certainly Bull Hudson, who we lost, but John DeMari's down there now. And when I see him, I love interacting with him because he talks to me about what have I seen, what am I concerned about, what do I see going on downtown, what he wants feedback in terms of what's going on his beat, and that way he knows more, and he's trying to satisfy me as a citizen. And it's an interaction with a police officer that I'd never had. Growing up in Ocean City, even though I knew all the police officers, it was more of they were like watching you, to see, make sure you don't step out of line kind of thing.
Sure.
But this is a much more mutual thing where he's like one of us in the downtown and wants us to thrive and do well and really cares about the area that he's serving.
Mm-hmm. So each neighborhood, each area, very different from the other. And really that's part of our job, is to figure out what that neighborhood wants, what is it willing to accept of itself, how it sees itself, and then our goal really is to meet them and push that forward for them. So really glad to hear, that John has taken that to heart. I wouldn't expect anything less of him. His caliber of policing is beyond reproach. He's committed. He's committed to the process, and he understands what it means to be a member of the community.
Yeah, he's a good lookout down there, and I just love seeing him and interacting with him. It's always a positive experience,
Good.
which is nice. You've had some issues here lately. There was 2 separate issues involving Salisbury Police. One was an evidence room situation, and then something spun out of that with conduct of some officers in a specific case. I've written a lot about it. If you want to go to the SalisburyIndependent.net site, people can read all about it if they want. I won't get into all the details, but what kind of happened was it kind of shined a spotlight on you all, maybe not in a great way, and you had to sort of not be defensive, but to explain how the processes work and to restore trust with people. How's that going? What's your mission there?
Well, it absolutely is, first and foremost, to restore trust, just internally. The city has finalized and chosen a vendor to provide an audit, a full audit and inventory for us, for our property room. So we are getting ready, getting geared up for that. And then to add a level of transparency, we're going to have a representative from the police department, a representative from the state's attorney's office, and a representative from the public defender's office there present for the audit while it rolls forward. And while the criminal part of that investigation is still ongoing, that's been hampered a little bit by the pandemic. We do anticipate resolution shortly on the criminal aspect of it. But as far as the audit itself, that is just about ready to get underway. We've staffed the property room with some additional personnel. We've had them trained up to understand what their roles are, and they're now certified as property custodians, and then we'll have additional training as we move forward with that team. So it's been a very difficult process, and I'm glad that we discovered it when we did, and I'm hopeful that with the criminal investigation, I'm hopeful that it'll be winding up soon once our court system gets underway.
Right, and this is something, it gets audited all the time, and it kind of came up in an audit. That's when the property room situation was first discovered.
So that term audit, I have come to learn, is a very specific term. We do inspections 4 times a year, and we also are an accredited agency. CALEA is our accrediting body, and they come down, they actually come in and do inspections of our entire process, including how we operate property. So that was moving along quite well. We didn't pick anything up that was to the contrary of ordinary process and procedure. And when we assigned new personnel to the property unit itself, that's when we did our complete and full audit, and that's when we began to suspect that there was a problem.
I had a reader just recently say, you talk about the property room all the time, but you never define what it is. He was like, I'm sure you people know what it is, but what's in there? Is it stuff that's obtained when you arrest someone, the stuff in their pockets? Is this evidence that's going to be used in a trial? What's in the property room?
So it is those items. It's personal property of individuals that we have taken into custody. It's also found property. It's property that has been surrendered to us for safekeeping in certain instances. And it also contains many items of evidence. Some of those items, such as items involved in a homicide, we never get rid of. We always preserve them. But you can imagine, just with our caseload and the number of calls for service a year and the number of arrests that we make out of the year, just how many items there are within that unit.
What do you make of this effort, this so-called defund the police thing? People talk about that all the time, but there's never specifics. Like, what do you want to defund if you want to defund the police? What do you think of that? Where's that coming from, and what would that mean?
In speaking to several advocates for defund the police, it means taking money away. It can mean as minimal as taking money away from a police budget and applying it to another entity to handle certain calls or certain engagements. such as, say, an emergency petition, or it could mean all the way up to the extreme in no more police, depending on who you speak to. As far as the second part of your question of what I take on it, I actually think that police departments need more investment in training, in additional time for training of personnel, in recruitment and retention of personnel. Having quality people who want to serve in this capacity and then want to serve in whatever branch they end up, securing employment is really critical. Municipal policing is vastly different from what the policing looks like on a county level, a state level, and even the federal level. So municipal policing, I would argue, is probably the most difficult because of the nature of the work that's done consistently. There aren't too many policing opportunities that have individuals in direct contact with neighbors and residents and business owners repeatedly throughout their career, other than municipal policing.
Right.
So, it takes a certain depth and skill set and kind of emotional intelligence to be sustained 25 years doing that type of work.
Yeah, from watching it, I get the sense that you all are in the neighborhoods, whereas the deputies are called into the neighborhoods and the state police are definitely called in. But you guys are actually in the neighborhood, living in the neighborhood.
Right, and the mandates are different, and we need our deputies to handle, unincorporated areas. The same thing with our state police partners. Highway safety is a huge issue, and certainly, Salisbury Police, we don't have the time to dedicate to that, because our work is about neighbors.
When I came back as editor in 1999, I remember walking into a situation. It was all different people in charge, but it was literally a situation where the city police and the sheriff's department and the state police did not get along. There was not a lot of coordination. There was a lot of sniping back and forth. And I don't get that feeling anymore. I get the feeling that you guys are pretty united in how you do things.
Well, it's interesting, and you kind of time-stamped it. Policing in the 90s compared to policing that we do today has changed on so many levels, and that's one of them. Even in my former jurisdiction, we were very siloed, But the only gains to be gotten out of that were from the criminal aspect. So, we've come a long way in our industry to realize that the arrest doesn't matter. What matters, not necessarily what color the patch is that somebody's wearing when they make the arrest, just that the arrest gets made. Or that information is shared so that not only are our communities safer, but our officers are safer as well. I think certainly I'm very grateful for the partnerships that we have with our allied agencies, but it even goes beyond those people who are wearing a uniform. It goes to the school system, and it goes to the religious community as well. Those partnerships that we've all been able to develop outside of policing, we've all benefited from that as well.
One of the things we would look forward to every year, March or April, we get the crime report stats from the year before, and can tell, it's sort of a report card for how you all are doing or how the city's
Right.
doing. And I've always argued there's only so much police can do about crime. But anyway, this year we didn't have that because there was so much going on. You had the pandemic, you had the situation with the property room. So we're still waiting to hear how the crime stats were from 2019. But based on the stuff that I have seen, it was a pretty good year for crime in Salisbury in terms of us not having crime, I mean.
Our crime rate was lower than the year before, which is great.
Which set the record.
It did. I don't know if it was 18 that set the record or 17 that set the record. I'd have to look to be sure. But it was moving in a great direction. I think the numbers are skewed right now because of the pandemic.
Right.
Our calls for service are different. They're kind of all over the map. They're
Right.
mostly trending down, but you can see it kind of mirrors what's happening at the state level as far as different phases of reopening, as to different numbers of call for service that we're responding to. But thank you for reminding me. I will definitely get that information out for you.
Right. Well, I know it was going to be a big presentation, but the timing just couldn't get
Yeah,
organized
no,
in terms of the timing.
it wasn't working out.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. What's it like in the city now? I mean, we've got our dynamic mayor, someone who you work very closely with. He's on deployment for 10 months. He still seems to answer most of my emails, so I get the feeling he's still involved in what goes on. So what's
Well,
it like?
would you expect anything different?
Well, I don't know where he is or what he's doing, but
Even
I mean,
being deployed, he's not going to miss a beat.
But what's it like not having the boss around in the same way?
I consider him a true partner. So that piece of it, while he's not physically here, is definitely felt, definitely a loss. But our city administrator, who stepped into that role and stepped up to the plate, has been doing a phenomenal job. And I very much appreciate, her leadership and her partnership as well. So I know she's got a lot on her plate, but I think she's doing incredibly well in his absence.
What is your biggest concern right now when you're laying there in bed at night and trying to think about all the stuff you're trying to organize? What is taking up space in your head?
It's the safety of my officers, because if they're not comfortable, if they're not safe, if they're not prepared, then we can't be what we need to be for our city. And so the topic of mental health, which really came up near and dear to our hearts a couple of years ago when Officer Hudson committed suicide, all of that is kind of resurging again. And so making sure that we have things in place for our officers to make sure that they are showing up ready to go to work, that they are mentally prepared, physically prepared, emotionally prepared to go meet the very different challenges that they're facing every single day. That's what's on my mind. That's what keeps me up at night.
I know I tease you sometimes, but one of the great moments in your career that I've witnessed was when there was someone with a mental health issue who jumped in the river, who wanted to end it all, and you jumped in there, risked your life to save the guy.
Well, two of my officers had gone in, and this individual clearly needed assistance. So I felt the need to lend what assistance I could at the time. I don't know of any Salisbury police officer who wouldn't do the same again and again and again. That's one of the reasons that many of us, took an oath of office.
What's the biggest misconception out there? What do people need to know about what you all do? I think right now the biggest misconception, the thing that I could probably shed light on the most, is that police officers they're from here. They're from our neighborhoods. They're from towns and counties, and they make a decision to serve others. And it's not an easy decision to make. You're certainly not going to get rich making that decision, but a life of service is vastly important to the overwhelming majority of police officers today. It's a path, and certainly I don't think you'd find anyone that would argue with you about how difficult it is right now. And we have spouses, we have children, we have families, just like everybody else. And we keep showing up. And it's amazing to me every day when I walk in and the roll call room is full. And I know where their hearts and their heads are. And it's just overwhelmingly amazing, every single day that they're choosing to show up and continue not only for themselves but for the city in an effort to make it better. She's Police Chief Barbara Duncan, City of Salisbury, going through a very stressful time right now, and we're all rooting for the police and rooting for everyone in law enforcement as we sort through this. So thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent Newspaper, another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.
Right.
Sure.